Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm really excited to get this seminar started. Before we dive into anything, I will let Bria, who is the other co-facilitator, just briefly introduce everyone to Zoom so that we are comfortable using the platform.
Hi, welcome to Zoom. If you're familiar with Zoom, there are many features to utilize in today's chat. There's a mute and unmute button. We ask that you keep your audio muted until it's time for you to speak. You're able to turn your video on and off. We have a chat room where you will put your questions when it's time for the Q&A, or if you have any thoughts you'd like to put down. There are different ways to view the screen. If you want to see everyone, you can choose the gallery mode, or if you'd like to see just the person that is speaking, you can choose the speaker mode. Both of those modes are in the top right-hand corner. Lastly, you can react to a speaker on the bottom of the screen, button on the button on the bottom right. Sorry. We encourage you to use these functions during today's seminar. You may notice that we are recording today's seminar. However, this video will not be shared with students. Videos or identifying information is visible. We encourage you to keep your video on and to join in the conversation during the Q&A portion of the seminar. Thank you.
So I will briefly introduce myself. I am Luke Chinman. I am a rising senior at Alderdice High School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'm really excited to get started. I will let Bria introduce herself and then we'll.
Hi, I'm Bria. I just graduated from Montour. I'm attending Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona. I will be studying sociology with the main focus in global work. I've been in global leadership for about 4 years now, and yeah.
Great. So once again, thank you guys so much for joining. This seminar is part of a virtual series of events through the World Affairs Council surrounded by the idea of building back better. So the COVID-19 pandemic presenting innovative programming and activities on global issues. We have launched virtual events framed around the idea of the Build Back Better agenda. And so this agenda was created to have a holistic approach to the post-disaster recovery, and it encourages us to evaluate and rethink our society. Instead of just rebuilding things the way that they were before the pandemic, we want to rebuild our systems to be just, equitable and more resilient than before. So our goal is for our public programming to be a platform for diverse audiences and speakers to come together to build stronger, more resilient connections that transcend all communities, so that as we move forward, we can be stronger together.
Today's specific seminar will focus on how COVID-19 has impacted education and how young people can be active participants in building our education systems back together. We are joined today by Sanaa Kaloon, a high school student working with Student Voice and the Pritchard Committee Student Voice team. Pam Harper, Board Director of Pittsburgh Public Schools, and Jolene Hester, a teacher at Montour High School. Our speakers will share their perspective as participants at different levels of our educational system. We hope today's conversation will illuminate how COVID-19 is affecting education in Pittsburgh and beyond, and how we can work together to build our education system back together. For more information, we encourage you to check out the background resources shared with you via email prior to the seminar.
So as Bria mentioned, as we were planning the seminar, we thought the most effective way to dive into the ways that education intersects with the pandemic would to give a variety of perspectives. And because everyone on this call is involved with education in some way or another, we thought the best way to start this conversation would to pair people one-on-one to answer some basic questions about their own experiences. So we're going to paste some questions into the chat, and then Kathleen, who's working in the background, will put us all into one-on-one breakout rooms. And we encourage you to turn on your camera, unmute yourself in the breakout room, and have a one-on-one conversation about the questions. And these questions are mostly focused for students, but because everyone in this room is involved in education, I think they'll all still be relevant to all participants. So Kathleen, would you like to start the breakout rooms?
Thank you for participating in the icebreakers. Now we're going to be hearing from our speakers. To begin, our first speaker is Sanaa Kaloon. Sanaa Kaloon is a rising senior at Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Lexington, Kentucky. She currently serves as the research director of the Pritchard Committee Student Voice Team, a statewide education nonprofit dedicated to amplifying the voices least heard in the Kentucky education system and elevating students as full partners in education research, policy, and practice. She holds positions at the National Education System Support Fund Fun, and Student Voice as ambassador and writer respectively. If you have questions for Ms. Kaloon while she's giving a presentation, please feel free to add those to the chat, and we'll try to address them during the Q&A portion of the seminar. Ms. Kaloon, we turn over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me. I'm just going to start screen sharing because I have some slides. So I'm going to be talking to you guys today about students as full partners in bringing us back to a new normal. If my slides ever load. Oh gosh. Okay, can you guys see that? Good, okay. So the Pittsburgh Committee Student Voice team is comprised of about 100 or so members at any given time. We are statewide. We take youth of all ages as long as they're students. And our biggest draw and our biggest concession to equity is that we are self-selected, which means there is no application process. We try to keep barriers to entry as low as possible. So if you are interested and you are a Kentucky student, we welcome everyone to be a part of our team. And this was already kind of addressed in my introduction, but the mission of the Student Voice team is to amplify and elevate the student voices least heard in our education system and to support students as partners to improve Kentucky schools in education research, policy, and practice. And we are an extension of the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence, which is a statewide nonprofit that works to improve education across all ages for the entire Commonwealth of Kentucky. And one thing that we really hold dear and try to emphasize is the concept of meaningful student voice. Oftentimes when trying to implement student voice in education, people get stuck in the lower levels of expression or consultation. So think student councils that don't have more meaningful roles than planning dances, or surveys that are never shared back with students and are never designed by students. We're trying to move the system towards the upper levels of student voice, which involve presence and participation, which is what I'm doing right now, and then partnership, which is what we've been trying to do in our state, and then finally activism and leadership to affect policy changes across the state, school, and national level, whichever the student is most akin to. So the reason why I'm talking to you guys today is because of a project that we did called the Coping with COVID-19 Student-to-Student Study. So around March, when COVID really hit the US, we started thinking about what gaps there were in the narrative. And we quickly realized that there was an enormous gap in the student experience. We were hearing a lot about education from the perspective of teachers and educators, but we were not hearing a lot about the student experience. So in May, we implemented our survey, and this was done in partnership with the University of Kentucky. This survey garnered over 13,000 responses, and we had representation from all 120 counties of Kentucky. We are currently working on analyzing that data and sharing back our findings, a few of which I will share with you today. The second part of this study is a series of peer-to-peer interviews, which will be happening as school begins again. And we are funded by Teach for America Appalachia, the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, National Geographic, and Pathways to Tomorrow. And then all of our other partnerships are listed below on this slide, if that is interesting to you. So here are some preliminary findings, because going through 13,000 responses worth of data takes a lot of time. But what we're seeing specifically is students in metro areas are really getting the chance to meet and contact their teachers much more often than students from rural areas. And that rural-urban divide is really important in Kentucky because we are Appalachian and because we have some really large urban areas in our state. And we've also found that students who had more contact with their teachers said that they had a more meaningful educational experience and were more engaged with their schoolwork. And here are some numbers to support that, and also to show that we have seen immense drops in the amount of people that felt like their schoolwork was meaningful and felt like they really understood what they were learning. And the increase of students who feel like they didn't understand their learning was the most concerning to us, because that means that these people are not gaining anything from their current educational experience, which is clearly not tenable to creating a holistic and meaningful education for these students at this time. And we've also found some worrying trends in student behaviors, mostly that Latinx and Asian students are communicating much less than other racial demographics, And most concerning is students with less consistent Wi-Fi access are more likely to report sleeping less, communicating with friends less, and having less fun, all of which are essential to creating a mentally and emotionally stable student experience. So when we return, the few things that have come to mind so far are the need for a flexible attendance policy. For students and students that are at a high risk for contracting COVID-19, overwhelmingly we're in support of a flexible attendance policy, showing us that we need to be accommodating and really allowing these students to be the ones driving that conversation because they are the ones with the least resources at this time. We've also clearly understood that students in chairs does not equate to engaged learning, and that same principle holds true whether you're online or in an in-person class. So in order to create an engaged student experience, teacher contact, virtual or physical, is required. We'd also like to re-examine the roles of SROs in discipline. SROs are school resource officers, and in the last legislative session, the Kentucky Senate and House voted to mandate that all SROs were required to be armed in Kentucky high schools. And I'm sure we've all seen the story of the girl who was put in a juvenile detention center because she did not complete her homework. We've seen a lot of issues with discipline come up, and they need to be resolved when talking about a virtual classroom. Oops. So just a few pointers. We need schools and districts to be working with students, not for students. And what that really boils down to is co-creation, which means students and district leaders need to be involved in creating dialogues and creating these surveys and really involving students as full partners in any reopening and moving school forward principles. So with that, here is my contact information, and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much. I found what you said about kind of having students be a collaborator on the process and not just like tokenizing them and using them, and actually involving students in the process, very meaningful, and I connected to that a lot. So next we're going to hear brief remarks from Ms. Harbin. Ms. Pam Harper believes that every student has the right to learn, the right to be treated with dignity and respect, and the right to feel welcome and safe in their school. She's the mother of 2 students in the Pittsburgh public school system, and she has been very active in transforming public education using community-driven solutions and collaborative decision-making for educational equity and access. Pam is a co-founder of the Education Rights Network and has led a successful campaign for solutions, not suspensions, because kids can't learn if they're not in school. And this campaign helped Pittsburgh Public Schools change discipline policies and practices which disproportionately push Black, Brown, and students with disabilities out of the school and into the school-to-prison pipeline. The work led to a new district policy banning the use of out-of-school suspensions in the pre-K to 2nd grade for minor nonviolent misconduct. So as a Pittsburgh Public School Board Director, Pam continues to fight for justice alongside students, parents, and educators to affect policy and practice change so every student can thrive. And again, if you have any questions for Ms. Harbin, please put them in the chat and we will get to them in the Q&A section of the seminar. So Ms. Pam Harbin, we will turn it over to you.
Whoops. I think I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. I really am excited to be here with everybody. I hope to hear more from you than from me. I didn't bring any slides or PowerPoint. I was hoping to maybe have a little bit of a dialogue, but I'll just talk to you a little bit about what happened in Pittsburgh Public Schools during COVID and thinking about how students' experiences were. I actually have 2 sons that are in the district, so I got to see that perspective, and then also the perspective of a policymaker, decision maker, which was very interesting to see all the moving parts of that. But what I was hoping to talk to a little bit about today, which I was really excited to see, that in Kentucky they're talking about the role of the SRO, is that before COVID, I think everybody understands now that COVID just exacerbated all of the inequities and all of the problems that we knew that we had in our education system. So when we look at the things that didn't go well during COVID and what we want to do better when we come back, hold on one second. I just need to change my view because I can't look at myself like that. Okay, so what things that people have been working on for years, including myself as an activist, have been the things that made school, frankly, unsafe, unhealthy, made schools into places where children could die, and they could have severe consequences for their life. And then COVID happened, and all of a sudden, everybody is rightly scared. But I think what I'm seeing is that people that were very comfortable in their schools and very comfortable in their school districts and their buildings and their places in education were now feeling discomfort. So we've gotten to a place now where I think that now that we are all feeling the discomfort, we are maybe a little bit more open to looking at some of the discomfort and situations that other people were in. So when COVID happened and we realized that we had to switch to remote learning and that not everybody had a computer, not everybody had access to the internet, it was a real eye-opening experience for people. And I frankly was getting emails from people saying, well, let me just donate a couple computers and we're just going to fix this so that my child can continue to learn in the way that they were learning. So I'm hoping that with students who are in the center of all of this and see it better than anybody else, because parents are making decisions for students based on the student themselves. But students are in schools with their peers, and they do see the differences, and they do see that their peers are struggling when they're not, when they go home. So creating these, building it back better, to me, is building it back definitely more just, but it has to also dismantle some of the systems that allow the inequities to happen anyway. So we have had these systems in place that are white supremacist, that are oppressive systems, and we've allowed it to happen. And so now I would like, to have these conversations about how to build back better, talking about how do we build back better, but in a way that is not going to allow the opportunity hoarding, the systems that are built on white supremacy to be built again. So one of the things that I've been working a lot on in Pittsburgh Public Schools, and I just want everybody to know that we're talking about a school district. Pittsburgh Public has 23,000 students, 70% are economically disadvantaged, 4.5% English learners, 20% students with disabilities, 1.6 foster care, 3.8% homeless students. So we are not talking about, and we have 2,070 teachers, which I think is interesting. We are not talking about a small school district. It is it's a large urban school district with lots of complexities in the first place. And when COVID happened, our response was slow, frankly. We didn't have computers for everyone. We didn't have the funding for computers for everyone. We didn't even have a good way to reach everybody, believe it or not. So in a school district where a lot of the population is transient, there's students that are moving throughout the year. We have one school of like 400 students that half of the students actually move throughout the school year. So you start the school year with students, and then by the end of the school year, half of them are gone. So this is, these are different things that you have to think about during COVID. But one of the things that also came out of this is this, reimagining our school district and reimagining some of the things that we were working on, or I'm a new school board member, so I've been on the board for about 6 months. So sometimes you'll hear me say we as an activist, and sometimes you'll hear me say we as a school board member, and it kind of gets mixed up. But Pam as an activist has been working since 2007, trying to change some of these systems, including suspensions, policing, special education. All of those systems exclude certain students from their educational right. So those systems that exclude children, that don't allow them to thrive, have been in place, way before COVID. So now we're going to come back from COVID, and what I'm hoping everybody's going to say is, let's put the systems in place where those students that have been marginalized and oppressed, they have the step up to be able to thrive in the new system. And that's hard, right? So some of the things that we've been working on, in my bio, you heard the suspension ban from K to 2. We're trying to move that suspension ban through the 5th grade. There's going to be a collaborative, community-driven task force, basically, to look at that, to see how we can expand our suspension ban. And, has the suspension ban been working the way that we have it? We are looking at reimagining school safety. So myself and another board member put forth a resolution that'll be voted on in August to talk about how we can basically have police-free schools. It's a little bit different in Pittsburgh. Everywhere, I heard Kentucky was SROs. Usually the police are contracted. So if you've seen a lot of school districts, I think starting in Minneapolis, but all across the country now, have ended their contracts with their school police. And Pittsburgh, our school police are staff. So we have hired them. There are 22 school police that are part of our staff. So that's a little bit different. We had a public hearing last month that had 12 hours of speakers about school policing. So it's a very hot button issue, but I'm hoping that we'll bring that conversation to the forefront so that people can talk about, frankly, for me, the conversation should be about the word safety. So when you think about being safe in your school as a student, what does that mean? What does that mean for you as a white student in the suburbs with a police officer in your building versus an immigrant student in the city with a police officer in your building? And so what does that mean? And do you feel safe having a police officer roaming the halls every day? Is that police officer there to serve and protect you, or do you feel threatened by that police officer? So I think the whole conversation of safety is really important, and it should start with students and coming to grips with that, because I have heard from plenty of students that they don't agree. So there are students that say, I won't feel safe. I mean, we had, in Pittsburgh, we had the tragedy of the Tree of Life shooting at the synagogue. And I went to the high school in that neighborhood, and there was a parent, it was a parent meeting, and a parent that said, my daughter won't feel safe unless she walks into this building and there's a police officer with a badge and a gun. And, that is a very desperate or, disparate view from somebody who says, I don't feel safe because that police officer can, call ICE on my parents or something like that. So it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. To me, any policy changes in a school district should start with conversations with people that are impacted the most. So students always should be at the forefront. I wasn't planning on saying this today, but our school district, I think, has done a pretty good job with student voice. We have inside of our own district, not outside, but inside a student voice department, basically. And they are working with high school students. They're going to be moving it down to middle school. And the goal is eventually to even get to elementary school. so that our students have a voice in any policy decisions that are made, any practices. I don't want to go on. I just really want to have a conversation and hear from you more than anything else. But, you know, I feel the burden of being a school board member. And I say burden because if anybody says that it's a fun thing, they're not doing their job, because it is a burden. And I feel the burden, and it is, you know, it keeps me up at night, because I know that I have the lives of students and staff, you know, in me to make these decisions and to do it right. So I appreciate these conversations. I appreciate talking about how we can have students, drive the school bus to make the decisions. And I'm just, glad to be here and be able to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harbin, for your insightful presentation. Next, we are going to hear brief remarks from Ms. Hester. Ms. Hester is a Global Studies and AP European History teacher at Montour High School's Social Studies Department. In addition to the classes she teaches, she is the Global Leadership Certificate. She's a Global Leadership Certification Program Advisor, students working for Social Justice Teacher Ally, Gay Straight Alliance co-sponsor, Model United Nations Advisor, and Stand Together Program Advisor. Please add your questions to the chat, and we will get to them in the Q&A session that is up next. Ms. Hester, we turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bria. I appreciate that introduction. I've been fortunate enough to work with Bria on many different clubs while she was at Montour High School. Like Bria, I tend to ramble, so I just have a couple slides, and my remarks will be brief. Can everybody see what I'm sharing here? Somebody? Okay, thank you. I don't usually use Zoom, I use Google Meet. So like Bria said, I teach at Montour High School. Some of these slides are from another thing that I did, so there might be a little bit more information on these than you want, like contact information and stuff. Bria said I teach social studies to 11th grade, and I run a bunch of different clubs. I just want to talk a little bit about my own experiences as a teacher during what I consider to have been crisis learning from March to June. I have, like Ms. Harbin, I have 2 boys. My boys do not go to Montour School District. They go to another local school district. It's called North Hills. And they were in 2 separate buildings during the crisis learning time of quarantine. And so I got to see, what they were dealing with, as well as what my own students were dealing with. And it was very difficult during that time period. A lot of it was because, you can see on here, I just threw some information up, and basically what this is what Montour's approach was during crisis learning was called a no harm approach. And this came by way of some guidance from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Basically, all this information on here means that our students' grades could not drop once we went home on March 13th. They could do some makeup work for the third 9 weeks to bring their grades up, but the 4th quarter was pass fail. Failing students could rise if they really put the work in, but we did not give any exams, and we didn't score anything. We were able to provide some meaningful educational experiences to our students with meaningful feedback, but for some students, especially at the high school level, this was sort of permission to just drop off the face of the earth. They didn't have to do anything. Their grades were sort of guaranteed. For other students, they did disappear, but it wasn't for this reason. This was Montour's effort to sort of address some of the inequities that we see, and that I want to say Sana, I hope I said that correctly, that she was talking about also in hers. I paid a lot of attention to how COVID affected my students and what I could do for them. And I did 2 days of social emotional questioning and games during this time period. I really chose to focus on my students as people as opposed to the content. And they missed out on a lot of the content. I'm not sure if I was a math or science teacher, if I hadn't been able to do this, but I was teaching, the French Revolution. And I know that some of my students didn't learn enough about the French Revolution or Napoleon, but I'm hoping that they felt cared for and valued during this time if they were able to tune in. So my students reported a lot of problems with their mood and sleep. A lot of them lost interest. Like I said, they didn't have consequences for not, coming to school. So they didn't tune in at all. There were 3 students that I actually didn't see from March 13th. I still haven't heard back from them at all. My children had a lot of different disparity in the amount of work that they got in different classes and from different teachers. Bria mentioned a bunch of the different clubs that I run, and I know that students really felt a lot of loss from losing out on clubs and sports activities, especially students in their junior year who get a lot of scouting on them for sports for future scholarships. And then everybody, I think, was dealing with the uncertainty and chaos of the pandemic, where in Pennsylvania, especially in Allegheny County, and then again in Philadelphia County on the other side of the state, like the numbers were just so huge and changing all the time. In addition to all of that, we know that there are a lot of inequities with our students. Family obligations, older students, especially the students that are the age that I teach, having to babysit or take care of younger siblings. A lot of students were missing out on mental health services that they received through the school district. Lots of students are pulled out of the classroom to have one-on-one counseling because that's available through the school district, and perhaps it's not available with their family's health insurance plan. A lot of students are dealing with ill family members. We were fortunate that COVID did not, ravage the Montour School District like it did other school districts. So we didn't have a ton of students dealing with that, but I know that other students across the nation were dealing with the loss of parents or the loss of grandparents or other family members. And then students in, other states like New York were dealing with also the loss of staff and faculty and other people within their school district. But technology issues, I think, were one of the biggest things that we saw. We're a one-to-one district at Montour, and that is not the case. Ms. Harbin talked about, the Pittsburgh public schools and their rush to try to provide technology to their students. But even at Montour, where we're fortunate enough to have a one-to-one program where our students are provided with a piece of hardware, not all of them have access to Wi-Fi at home. And obviously, that's not the case in every home across the country where students even have a device that they can do schooling on. So, this is going to look different in the fall. Well, not in the fall, it's going to be in a couple weeks whenever students go back. If they don't have a device and they're going back remotely, what's this going to look like? It's not going to be that crisis situation where we're not going to be grading, where there's not going to be as stringent attendance policies and things like that. This is going to have to be real school. It's going to have to be true distance learning, but we're still going to have these inequities. So again, like I said, my focus for my students from March to June was really focusing on those relationships and connections, making sure that my students felt loved and cared for, and trying to make sure that their social and emotional needs were met. But in a few weeks when we go back, if we would for some reason go back virtually or go back to school and then have to leave to go virtually, if something happens and the numbers get worse, we do have to focus on education at the same time. So what can be done? I don't have any answers here. This is just a question. I'm glad that we're all together to talk about this kind of thing to see, maybe we can all figure out what can be done. That's really all I have because I don't know what can be done. So many things.
Thank you for that informative presentation, Ms. Hester. We are going to continue this conversation with Ms. Colloon, Ms. Harbin, and Ms. Hester. We'd like to invite you all to join. You can continue to add your questions to the chat, but please treat this as a dialogue. We want to hear your voice. If we call on you to ask your question, please turn on your mic and ask your question to the speaker. If you aren't able to access your mic or you prefer to not ask your question aloud, please note that in the chat and we'll ask your question on your behalf.
While people are entering in their questions, I will start the discussion with a question of my own. So as the coming school year is nearing, and so I'd like to get all of the speakers brief thoughts on going back to the school, like in-person school, but thinking about that from like an equity and a logistical lens. So I guess we can start with Sana and then move to Pam and Ms. Hester at the end.
So in terms of going back to physical school, from a public health standpoint, I don't think that's possible. But again, I'm not a public health official, so I'm not qualified to say that. In terms of education equity, I believe that really the way to solve the equities that we're seeing are really like, it all comes down to access. And there's so many factors that impact a child's access. So anything that we come up with has to be reactive, which is why I'm struggling to come up with like a one size fits all kind of solution, just because the barriers faced by every school is different between districts and between counties and states. And it's an impossible question to pose at a national level, I think. But in terms of like local change, I think a lot of that has to be done with a very careful eye on the demographics and the local challenges that are in each specific place.
I can chime in. I think that's very well said, and I think the challenge to me at this point is how do we not let survival of the fittest run rampant, because that's pretty much what's going to happen. So you see, parents are scrambling to figure. Well, first of all, in our school district, we've already decided we can't bring everybody back to school. There's no way we could distance and be safe in our school buildings with everybody in it. So in school would only be 2 days a week for students anyway. And we're going to be voting on Friday to start the first 9 weeks completely remote. But what's going to happen, what I'm afraid of is that there will be people that have access to, different childcare options or hiring tutors and that kind of thing. And they will wind up using those methods to educate their kids and not really worried about the whole. And I think as school districts, we have to be, we can't control that, but we have to be able to look at who are the most, who don't have those safety nets and don't have the access like that, and be able to make some decisions that will not give the small amounts of education that we are able to deliver in a good way, and only deliver it to certain students, if that makes sense.
My motto through this whole entire thing of, going back to school virtually, going back to school live, has been that there are no good answers. I wish I could have like a t-shirt that said there are no good answers. So, I feel like I have 3 different perspectives. As a mother of 2 children, I really don't want my kids in school. But then I also know that, my one child will thrive no matter what situation he's in. And my other child, he will fall behind. He has an IEP. He has special learning needs, and he needs a lot of help. Whereas if I'm teaching, whether I'm live in my building or whether I'm at home teaching live throughout the day, he won't have any supervision. And it's just, he basically stopped doing any kind of work for school on April 3rd in the spring, because it was just too much for him, even with a bunch of accommodations. So as a mother, I would prefer for them to be at home, even though I know that one of them needs to be in school live and follow that herd mentality to be able to get things done. As a teacher, I want to be in the classroom with my students. I know that they need that. They need me. They need that whole interaction. They need socialization, even if it is masked from 6 feet away. But as an individual, and I'm a high-risk individual, I have severe asthma, I don't want to be in the classroom right now. I just don't feel that it's safe. And these are just my perspectives. As I connect with educators across the country, in this new age where I feel like this has caused more connection across the country. You know, there are situations that I could never dream of that occur in other districts and other schools. So there is no one size fits all. There's not even one size fits all for neighboring districts. Next to Montour, we have a very low income district. It's called Stowe Rocks. And for us to go back virtually looks one way, and for them to go back virtually looks a completely different way. So there's just too much inequity. So there are no good answers. I feel like safety should be first, but then where does education fall within that?
Thank you, guys. We have a question from, I'm so sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, but Lame Sabir, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's Lamise, yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay, you're good.
Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. So my question was for Ms. Harbin, and I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I was just wondering about the Student Voice Committee you talked about at Pittsburgh Public Schools. So that was really interesting. And at my district, we're trying to get more involved with the school board and those decisions and like school board meetings. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on that or explain what they contribute to.
Yeah, so it actually started when we did a superintendent search for this current superintendent, Dr. Hamlet, and there were different committees that were formed, a parent committee, student committee, to ask the question, what is it you're looking for in a superintendent? And that student committee was something that Dr. Hamlet thought was pretty amazing. So when he got here, he asked to kind of formalize that. So the student, I can't remember the name of it, Student Voice, but there's a staff person, and each school gets to nominate students that will be part of this, you know, kind of advisory committee for the superintendent, basically. And then they have like some ambassador programs too, but it's not connected to the school board. They have made presentations to the school board about, you know, the things that they decide to work on. So I believe last year they were working on food and lunch. So they did make a presentation to the board about, you know, what their recommendations would be, that kind of thing. But, you know, in Pennsylvania, you have to be 18 to be a school board member, and you can't have like so you can't have a student voting.
And then just like really quickly to elaborate on that, do you think that that committee has been effective, and have they had any voice in, you know, like curriculum or like the recent events from like, you know, more equity in schools?
Yeah, so I've been to 2 big events that the group did, and and actually, so interestingly, I forgot to tell you this, the Pittsburgh Public Schools did something interesting, knowing that we didn't do a great job with COVID when we got forced to shut down in March. Mm-hmm. They created a committee called the All-In Committee to look at 14 different areas of, you know, from curriculum to school safety, students with disabilities, English learners, to be able to figure out how to do it better coming back. And so there were students that were involved. I forget how many, but there were parents, there were students, there were community members, and that was, you know, a big committee trying to plan to come back. And when we started it in the summer, I think we all had in our mind the hopes that we were going to actually be in school. So most of the planning is more about being in school, and now that we think we're going to switch to not be in school anymore, I'm asking for those committees to be brought back together again. And, you know, because I think having students give input on what it means to be learning and not in your school building. You know, my one son is a senior, and sure, it's, you know, it was terrible for seniors last year. It's going to be terrible for seniors this year. And, you know, they should have a voice in what that year is going to look like, for sure.
Thank you so much.
So we are almost out of time, so I'm going to ask the last question, which is sort of the overarching question of this seminar, which is, what role do young people play in building back a better education system? So we can start with Sana and then go to Pam and then Ms. Esther.
So I really liked hearing from Pam about what students have been doing in Pittsburgh. I thought that that was a really good starting point for really codifying student voice into a lot of long-term policy changes. Actually, in Kentucky, we just, like this week, we got a student non-voting member on the Kentucky Board of Education, which was like a huge deal for us. So we're really excited about that. But in terms of this specific pandemic, I think that the best way to ensure that young people have an active role in what is happening is that young people are solicited. Because often I feel like adults come to us for our perspectives, but rarely listen to us for our capacity, of which there are endless amounts of capacity. And I think taking that seriously, taking our drive and our ability to get things done, that is like, that the value of that is incredible, because students are not the future, they are the present, and they should be consulted at this moment immediately. Because like Pam said, like we are acutely aware of what is happening to our peers and to ourselves. So I would just really love if more people were aware of that.
So I come from a community organizing background, and I see there is a lot of organizing happening of students, the Black student unions and the GSAs. There are just a lot of groups that are student-led and student-driven, and that's really more of what I would like to see, because when the recommendations come from students, instead of, I can come and I can ask a few individual students, but when there's more power, I believe, in a student group that organizes around the same demands, frankly, district-wide. And I think that is there's power. I mean, you're the reason that we're all here. So to be able to organize yourselves and speak truth to power in big ways, I think is really powerful. And I would urge students to either find organizations that are already doing this kind of work or start your own, but and learn what school boards do, because I actually asked this on Facebook today. I don't even know if you learn about school boards in civics, but they are, it's a local elected position and they have a lot of power. And right now they have complete power over everything you do in school every day. So learn what school boards do and, find out what it is they're voting on every month, and, speak truth to power in an organized way. That's my.
I think that, we talk a lot about student voice and student choice in the classroom, and that comes down from administration, like how much are you listening to your students? How much choice are you giving them, and the ways that they're assessed in their knowledge and to demonstrate what they know. And then we have a lot of student-driven clubs. Half of the clubs that I run are student-led clubs where I sort of sit back as a facilitator. But at the district level, you don't see it as much. I'm thrilled to hear what they're doing in Pittsburgh Public, especially with it being such a large district in our area. But I feel like a lot of districts need to do that more. It's your education. It's where you spend the majority of your time. It's your lives that are being molded by your experiences in school. So I feel like, students need to be at the forefront of the decision making. Also, that's a valuable life skill, to learn how to negotiate and to brainstorm and to, collaborate with other people. I think that school districts that are doing this well with student voice, they should get it out there. They should call every district around them and say, look what we're doing. Why don't you try this too?
Okay, thank you so much for your answers. We want to give a huge thank you to Ms. Clune, Ms. Harbin, and Ms. Hester for joining us today for the important conversation and giving us valuable insight into COVID-19's impact on education. We thank you all for your time and meaningful contributions to this discussion. We hope that you guys feel better about this, this whole seminar. You feel that you can you have the tools to go out and do better, vote better.
And so for the final segment, throughout the emerging global leadership seminar, we've explored the coronavirus pandemic and its impact on our world and how it's affected healthcare and the environment and politics, the economy, and with this seminar, education. And so at the end of each seminar, we closed with an activity about digital tools that you can use to take action and raise your voice as we work to build back better. And so when we ask students what their favorite part of our programs, we often hear that it's about learning about actionable steps that they can take so that they can take informed action on what they've learned. And so with work and school largely taking place online, we believe it's very critical for young people to have the skills to effectively use digital tools in order to build our systems back better. And so next week, we have our closing workshop for this seminar series, and it's going to be in partnership with iGeneration Youth. And during that workshop, we will be discussing how to raise your voice to build back better using digital tools such as Instagram, Twitter, infographics, videos, alternative story formats, etc. And understanding how to use these tools is not only important for building back better, but it's also important for advocating about a variety of issues that you're passionate about. And so in order to make this workshop next week have the greatest impact and relevance, today we want to end the seminar with a brief conversation to help better understand how we use these tools, these digital tools, and what you all hope to gain from next week's workshop. So even if you're unable to attend the workshop next week, we want to hear your voice in this conversation. So the way we're going to run this is we are going to write a prompt in the chat, and I want everyone here, the students and the adults, to type a response to the prompt in the chat, and don't hit enter until I say send, and then we can look at everyone's responses as they come into the chat. Okay, thank you everyone for participating in this. Feel free to look back through the answers, and I'll turn it over to Bria to close out.
Okay, once again, thank you again for joining today's discussion. If you found this seminar interesting, you want to raise your voice, the iGeneration Youth has opened up their office hours Tuesday through Thursday, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, to any students that has participated in the Emerging Global Leaders Seminar. These office hours are a great way to work with students and experts to draft stories, workshop them, and get articles reviewed and submitted for publication. This is a free resource to use. To get a link to attend, please send an email to lcullen at igygglobal.com. I think it's attached in the comments. You can find this, or the chat room. You can find this email shared in the chat. We hope to we hope you will join us next week on Wednesday, August 5th, to learn how to raise your voice to build back better using Instagram, Twitter, and more. Please register and also invite your friends. You don't want to miss this. For more information on the final workshop, please visit tinyurl.com/2020EGLS. That's in all caps. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.